If you're here right now listening to my voice, I need you to do something for me. Press that like button, subscribe to Family Shock. And down in the comments, I want you to tell me, how well do you really know the person sleeping next to you? I'm asking because I thought I knew my husband, Julian. We had 35 years of marriage, 35 years of breakfasts, of holidays, of building a life. I thought he was a good man, a cultured man. But the devil doesn't always come with horns and a tail, my dears. Sometimes he comes in a tailored suit, smelling of expensive cologne, hiding a darkness so profound, it could swallow a whole family whole. That summer the heat was relentless. It was the kind of humidity that made the air feel thick, like you were breathing through wet wool. I had just retired from my job at the library, and suddenly the house I had lived in for decades felt different. It was too quiet. The silence seemed to amplify things I had never noticed before. The settling of the wooden beams, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Julian was away on business. He was an art dealer, a very successful one. He traveled the world, Paris, Milan, Tokyo, finding rare pieces and selling them to billionaires who didn't know a Monet from a child's finger painting. He was always immaculate, my Julian. His hands were soft, his nails manicured. He didn't like dirt, he didn't like mess. That's why it was so strange that he insisted on keeping the old potting shed at the very bottom of our long garden. It was a brick structure, almost entirely swallowed by thick, aggressive ivy. We never used it. It had been boarded up for at least 15 years, ever since a bad storm broke the windows. Julian had put heavy plywood over the glass and a padlock on the door, claiming it was unsafe and full of dry rot. I hadn't set foot near it in years. But with Julian away in London for a week, and me trying to fill my empty days, I decided it was time to clean up the garden. The ivy was starting to choke the oak trees nearby. I hired a local man, Carlos, a hard-working fellow with a weathered face and strong hands. I told him to clear the brush, trim the hedges, and especially to hack back that thick ivy covering the shed. I wanted the garden to breathe again. I was inside making a pitcher of iced tea when my phone rang. It was Carlos. I looked out the kitchen window, expecting to see him waving for water. But he wasn't in the garden. His truck was idling in the driveway. Mrs. Martha, his voice was tight, strained. He was whispering even though he was outside. Are you alone in the house? I froze, the ice tongs hovering over the glass. Yes, Carlos. My husband is away. Why? There was a long pause. I could hear his heavy breathing over the line. Mrs. Martha, you told me that shed at the back was empty. Boarded up for years, you said. It is, I replied, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Nobody has been in there since the late 90s. Ma'am, he stammered, and I could hear the fear in his voice. I was pulling down the ivy from the side window. The plywood there, it's rotted at the corner. There's a gap. A gap? So, it's just an old shed, Carlos. No, ma'am. When I pulled the vines away, I saw something. Inside. His voice dropped so low I had to press the phone tight to my ear. There's a face pressing against the glass from the inside. A pale face watching me. My heart stopped. The pitcher of iced tea slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen tiles, ice cubes skittering across the floor like diamonds. The sound was explosive in the quiet house. Get away from there, I whispered, my voice shaking. Carlos, get out of the garden now. I'm calling the police. He didn't need telling twice. I heard his truck peel out of the driveway before I even dialed 911. The police arrived quickly. 2 officers, young and capable, marched down the garden path with flashlights, even though it was high noon. I stood on the patio, my arms wrapped around myself, shivering despite the heat. They circled the shed. They tugged on the heavy padlock. It held fast. They shone their lights into the rotted corner Carlos had mentioned. After 20 minutes, they came back up the lawn. The taller officer shook his head. There's nobody in there, ma'am. It's pitch black inside, just old pots and spiders. The padlock hasn't been touched in years. Rusted solid. But Carlo saw someone, I insisted, feeling foolish but terrified. Shadows play tricks, Mrs. Martha, the officer said gently, the way you talk to a confused child. Especially with all that ivy moving in the wind. Maybe an animal got in. A raccoon, perhaps. They left, leaving me alone with the silence and the shattered glass on my kitchen floor. When Julian called that night from London, sounded smooth and unbothered. A squatter, perhaps, darling, he said dismissively when I told him. Or just that gardener's overactive imagination. Don't worry your pretty head about it. I'll reinforce the boards when I get back. You're just jittery because you've stopped working. You need a hobby. He made me feel small. He made me feel foolish. So I tried to forget it. I tried to go back to my quiet retirement. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and in the fertile soil of that silent house it began to grow. When Julian returned, he was different. Or maybe I was just watching him more closely. He was edgier. He snapped at me for small things like folding his newspaper wrong. And there were other things. Things that didn't add up. Julian was a man who dealt in finished products, framed canvases, polished sculptures. He hated the process of art. He hated the mess of creation. Yet, when I did the laundry, I started noticing smells on his expensive shirts. Faint but unmistakable. The sharp tang of turpentine. The rich, earthy smell of linseed oil. Sometimes a tiny smudge of pigment on a cuff, Prussian blue or burnt umber. I asked him about it once casually over dinner. Julian, have you been painting? You smell like an art studio. He froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. His eyes, usually so warm, went cold and flat. Don't be ridiculous, Martha. I was at a restoration studio today, checking on a client's Rembrandt. It's a messy business. You know I don't have a creative bone in my body. I just sell the stuff. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The explanation was plausible. Everything Julian said was always plausible. But the unease in my gut grew heavier. Then came the apple. It was a Tuesday. I was down in the garden, near the oak trees, trying to avoid looking at the shed, which Julian had practically armored with new wood upon his return. Lying in the grass, near the ventilation pipe that stuck out of the ground, for the old root cellar we never used, was an apple core. It wasn't just any apple. It was a Honeycrisp. They were expensive, out of season, and hard to find. But more importantly, Julian hated them. He only ate green Granny Smiths. I was the only one who bought Honeycrisps, but I hadn't bought any in weeks. I picked up the core. It was fresh. The flesh was barely browned. Someone had eaten this recently, right here in my garden. Seeing that apple core brought a wave of grief so strong, it nearly knocked me to my knees. It made me think of Sarah, my niece, my sister's daughter. Sarah had lived with us for 5 years after my sister died in a car accident. She was a brilliant, vibrant girl, bursting with artistic talent. She could look at a sunset and capture colors on canvas that I didn't even know existed. Julian had adored her, mentored her, encouraged her art. And then 15 years ago, when she was just 19, Sarah vanished. She left a note saying the pressure was too much, that she needed to find herself, that she was going to Europe to paint. We never saw her again. The police investigated, but she was an adult. There were no signs of foul play. Just a young artist running away from expectations. It broke my heart. It broke Julian's too, or so I thought. Sarah used to eat Honeycrisps by the dozen. She said they tasted like sunshine. Holding that apple core 15 years later, I felt a ghost walk over my grave. Things started moving faster after that. Julian's business had been struggling. The market was down. We were facing debts he tried to hide from me. Then suddenly a miracle. He announced he had secured an exclusive contract with an anonymous reclusive artist. He brought the first painting home to photograph it before the sale. He set it up in the living room. It was magnificent. A landscape of a storm rolling over a valley. The colors violent and passionate. I stood before it mesmerized. And then, A chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the painted storm. I knew those brushstrokes. I knew that way of layering the clouds, that specific shade of indigo blue in the shadows. It looks like Sarah's work, I whispered, my hand over my mouth. Julian was behind me, pouring whiskey. I heard the glass clink loudly against the decanter. Don't talk nonsense, Martha. Sarah was a talented child. This is the work of a master. A mature genius. Besides, Sarah gave up art years ago, wherever she is. His voice was sharp, dismissive. He was gaslighting me again, making me doubt my own eyes, my own memories of the girl I had raised. Who is this artist, Julian? Where did you find them? Anonymous means anonymous, Martha. Respect the client's privacy. It's going to save us, that's all that matters. This painting will fetch $500,000 easy. He sold it. And more followed. Money poured back into our accounts. Julian bought a new car. He bought me diamond earrings I didn't want. He was manic, high on success, but underneath it he was terrified. I could see it in the way he paced at night, the way he jumped when the phone rang. And he kept going outside at strange hours. At 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I would wake up and find his side of the bed cold. I'd look out the bedroom window and see the faint beam of a flashlight, moving toward the bottom of the garden, toward the shed. I couldn't take it anymore. The doubt was eating me alive. I had to know. The opportunity came on a Friday night. The biggest art gala of the year was happening in the city. Julian was the guest of honor, unveiling the latest anonymous masterpiece. He looked dashing in his tuxedo, but his eyes were frantic. "You're sure you won't come, Martha?" he asked, adjusting his bow tie in the hall mirror. "I have a migraine, Julian." "You go. Bask in the glory." He kissed my cheek, his lips were cold, and left in a cloud of expensive cologne. I waited until I saw the taillights of his Jaguar disappear down the long driveway. Then I moved. I went to his study. I knew he kept a spare set of keys in his desk drawer, hidden under a false bottom. I found them. A large ring of keys for the house, the cars, his gallery in the city. I flipped through them, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. The small brass key for the padlock on the shed was missing. He had taken it with him. Of course he had. I stood in the silent study, frustration burning, hot tears in my eyes. I looked out the window at the garden, bathed in the pale silver light of a full moon. The shed sat at the bottom, dark and menacing. A tomb of secrets wrapped in ivy. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. The image of that apple core, the smell of turpentine on his clothes, the brushstrokes in that painting that screamed my niece's name. It all coalesced into a horrifying certainty. I went to the garage. I rummaged through Julian's tool chest, until my fingers closed around the cold steel of a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. They were heavy, awkward in my hands. I walked down the garden path. The night air was thick with the scent of jasmine and damp earth. The grass was wet against my ankles. I felt like a burglar in my own home, a criminal sneaking through the shadows. I reached the shed. It loomed over me, silent and imposing. The new wood Julian had nailed over the windows looked like scars in the moonlight. The heavy padlock hung on the door, a metal guardian. I positioned the jaws of the bolt cutters around the shackle of the lock. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. And then I heard it. It was faint, drifting up from the ground near my feet. It was coming from the old metal ventilation pipe that stuck out of the lawn, the one I thought belonged to a long-filled root cellar. It was humming. A soft, mournful melody. A woman's voice, deep underground, humming a lullaby. A lullaby I used to sing to Sarah when she had nightmares as a little girl. The bolt cutters felt incredibly heavy in my hands. My whole body was trembling. I looked at the lock, then at the pipe in the ground. There was no turning back now. I squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters, with all the strength a 64-year-old woman could muster. The sound of the metal snapping echoed through the quiet garden like a gunshot. The heavy padlock hit the paving stone with a dull clang. That made me jump violently. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard. The broken lock at my feet, the bolt cutters heavy in my trembling hands. I pulled the rusted latch open. The shed door groaned in protest, the hinges shrieking as if warning me away. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The thin beam cut through the darkness inside. At first glance, the officers had been right. It was just an old shed. Terracotta pots stacked in tottering towers, bags of solidified fertilizer, ancient gardening tools hanging like torture devices on the walls. Cobwebs thick as cotton draped over everything. But the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just dust and dry rot. Underneath that was the sharp, chemical sting of turpentine, the rich, fatty odor of linseed oil, and something else. Something human and stale, like a room that hadn't had fresh air in a decade. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. I swung the flashlight beam around, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, in the back corner, behind a stack of rotting burlap sacks, was something that didn't belong. A trapdoor in the floor. It wasn't old, rough wood like the rest of the shed. It was newer marine-grade plywood, fitted with a heavy iron ring handle. I dropped the bolt cutters. It took both hands and all my strength to heave the trapdoor open. It was heavy, counterweighted. As it lifted, a blast of cool, damp air rushed up to meet me, carrying that smell of paint and confinement so strongly it made me gag. Below me was a set of steep wooden stairs leading down into the earth. Light, artificial and bright, spilled up from below. I descended, one shaking step at a time. It felt like I was walking down into hell. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a room. It was perhaps 20 feet square, with concrete walls painted white. It was soundproofed. I could see acoustic foam panels tacked to the ceiling. It was an art studio. Easels were set up around the room, holding canvases in various stages of completion. The floor was splattered thick with paint. Tables overflowed with tubes of expensive pigments, brushes soaking in jars of solvents, palettes covered in swirls of brilliant color. And in the center of the room, sitting on a stool before a large canvas, was a woman. She had her back to me. She was painting furiously, her arm moving in sharp, jerky rhythms. Her hair was matted, grayish-blonde, hanging down her back in a tangled mess. She wore oversized, paint-stained gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung off her skeletal frame. "Julian," she said, her voice rough and scratchy and used. She didn't turn around. "I'm almost done with the seascape. I need more titanium white. You forgot to bring it last night." My voice died in my throat. I couldn't speak. I just made a choked, whimpering sound. The woman stopped painting. The brush hovered over the canvas. Slowly, stiffly, she turned on the stool. The face that looked at me was gaunt, pale as paper in the harsh fluorescent light. Her eyes were sunken into dark sockets, squinting against the brightness, terrified. But I knew those eyes. I knew the shape of that nose, the curve of that jaw, even hidden beneath years of neglect and misery. It was Sarah, my beautiful, brilliant niece who had vanished 15 years ago at 19, was sitting in a concrete bunker underneath my garden, looking like a woman of 40. My eyes traveled down her body to her ankle. A heavy steel chain was padlocked around it, bolted to a metal ring set into the concrete floor. "Sarah," I whispered, the name tearing out of my chest, along with a sob that doubled me over. She blinked, confusion warring with terror on her face. "Aunt Martha?" Her voice was a cracked whisper, like dry leaves rustling. "Am I dreaming again? Julian gives me pills sometimes, they make me dream you're here." I ran to her. I fell to my knees on the paint-splattered floor and wrapped my arms around her frail, trembling body. She smelled of sweat and chemicals and fear. "It's me, baby. It's really me. Oh my God, Sarah. Oh my God." She didn't hug me back. She sat rigid, her arms at her sides. "You shouldn't be here, Aunt Martha. Julian will be angry. When he's angry, he turns off the lights. Sometimes for days. He says art requires suffering." Her words were knives in my heart. I pulled back to look at her. "Sarah, he did this to you? Julian?" She nodded slowly, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. "And then in that cold, bright room, she told me. She hadn't run away 15 years ago. Julian had lured her out to the shed one evening, promising to show her an old easel he'd found. He drugged her iced tea. When she woke up, she was chained in the dark. He told her that the world wasn't ready for her genius, that she needed to be isolated to truly create. He told her he was protecting her. He became her jailer, her only contact with the world. He brought her food, supplies, and demands for paintings. He told her I hated her for leaving. He told her the police were looking for her for a crime she didn't commit. He spun a web of lies so thick she couldn't see the sky. And for 15 years she painted. She painted out of fear, out of boredom, out of a desperate need to put the colors in her head onto something real. And my husband, that monster in a silk suit, took her soul and sold it to the highest bidder, building our comfortable life on her agony. We have to go, I said, standing up, a cold fury replacing my grief. We are leaving right now. I can't, she whispered, rattling the chain on her ankle. I don't have the key. Only Julian has the key. I looked around frantically. There were tools everywhere. I grabbed a heavy hammer from a workbench. Cover your eyes, Sarah. I knelt by the concrete block where the ring was set. I swung the hammer with a rage I didn't know I possessed. I hit the concrete again and again, screaming with every blow, channeling 35 years of betrayal into every strike. The concrete chip then cracked. Finally, the metal ring tore free. Sarah was free, but she was still dragging 4 feet of heavy chain attached to her ankle. I helped her up. She was so weak she could barely stand. Helping her up those stairs was the hardest thing I've ever done. She wept with pain at every step, her unused muscles screaming. When we burst out of the trapdoor into the shed, she gasped. The air, she whispered, smells so sweet. I led her out of the shed into the garden. The moonlight hit her face and she flinched, covering her eyes, overwhelmed by the vastness of the night sky after 15 years in a concrete box. I didn't take her to the house. I didn't trust that house anymore. I helped her to my car parked in the driveway. I put her in the passenger seat, reclined it, and covered her with a blanket from the trunk. She was shivering violently, her eyes wide and staring, trying to process the world. I got in the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the phone. I didn't call 911. I called the direct line to the city police chief, a man I knew from the library. Chief Delaney, I said, my voice unrecognizable to my own ears, flat and dead. This is Martha Vance. You need to send units to the City Art Gala immediately. And you need to send units to my home. My husband, Julian Vance, has been keeping my niece Sarah, prisoner in a bunker under our garden for 15 years. I just pulled her out. There was a stunned silence on the other end, then an explosion of activity. I drove Sarah to the nearest hospital, refusing to let go of her hand the entire way. The doctors and nurses were horrified by her condition. Malnourished, vitamin deficient, her skin translucent from lack of sun. While they tended to her, I sat in the waiting room, staring at a television tuned to the local news. The breaking news banner flashed red. They showed live footage from the art gala. Julian was on stage, holding a microphone, bathed in applause, looking so smug, so successful. And then police officers swarmed the stage. The look of pure shock on his face as they cuffed him in his tuxedo, right there on live television, was the only satisfaction I felt that night. It was poetic. The public unveiling of the true artist, him as a monster. Julian never spent a single night in freedom after that. The evidence in the bunker was overwhelming. The DNA, the journals Sarah had hidden, the thousands of paintings. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more depravity. He is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security prison, where there is no art, no beauty, only gray walls. Sarah's recovery was long and arduous. The physical wounds healed faster than the mental ones. She had to relearn how to live in the world, how to trust, how to walk in the sun without fear. She spent 2 years in a private specialized facility. I sold the house. I couldn't spend another night there. I used the money, Julian's blood money, every cent of it, to pay for Sarah's care and to establish a foundation for exploited artists. 6 months ago, we held an exhibition. The real exhibition. It was titled Sarah, The Light in the Darkness. It featured the paintings I rescued from that bunker. The world finally saw the true genius. Not the anonymous master Julian had created, but Sarah, my brave, broken, beautiful niece. She didn't come to the opening. She wasn't ready for crowds. But I sent her photos. In the pictures, people were weeping in front of her canvases, moved by the raw power of art created in captivity. I visit Sarah every week in her small sunlit apartment near the coast. She paints still, but only when she wants to. Sometimes I watch her, marveling at her strength, at the fact that she is still here. I sit and think about how easy it was for Julian to hide a whole life beneath the surface of ours. How a man can smile over breakfast, while keeping a woman chained in the dark 100 feet away. My dears, we build our lives on assumptions. We assume the people we love are who they say they are. We assume our homes are safe. But sometimes the floorboards are hollow, and the ivy is hiding more than just brick. If there is a strange sound in your house, don't ignore it. If something feels wrong in your gut, listen to it. Don't let anyone, no matter how much you love them, tell you that you are crazy for seeing what is right in front of your eyes. Because sometimes the monster isn't under the bed. Sometimes he's sleeping right beside you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it makes you look at your own world a little more closely. On the end screen now, you'll see 2 more stories from our channel. They are just as shocking, I assure you. Click on one and stay safe out there.